Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we've got Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone? I'm excited.
Are you?
Yeah.
Well, the last episode, you were like all Debbie Downer, boo-hoo, and First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever podcast player you choose to use. Thank you for that, and thank you for watching on YouTube. YouTube, we're doing pretty good, Ben.
I think so, yeah.
We don't have a ton of subscribers, but you know what? Doesn't matter. People are watching. So thank you for that. And if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach out to us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And we will simply ask you for your phone number and have a conversation with you about your specific situation and hopefully help you turn your mess into your message. I screwed up there a little bit, Ben.
That's okay.
You think I should edit it out?
No, it sounded like a scratch DJ.
Yeah, that's right. I don't have
beatboxer. What do they call them?
My
Beatbox?
headphones.
Is that when you do it with your mouth?
Yeah, beatbox.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So, all right. So today we're going to continue our series on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, or whichever 12-step program you choose. It just so happens Ben and I have gone the Alcoholics Anonymous route and served us pretty well over the past 12 years or more, and has served millions of people pretty well. There's no denying that is the number one way in which somebody can get sober. It's been around since 1935 and has worked for many people. So, kind of goes like, you don't fix what's not broken, Ben.
Correct.
So today we're on step 4, and step 4 is, Ben?
Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves.
That sounds pretty intimidating.
I hope I can hit everything that is bouncing around in my head right now.
Well, let's get started because we got about 30 minutes and we're going to try and cover as much as we can.
You called it intimidating, Tom. Why?
Well, because when you hear the words fearless moral inventory of ourselves, that sounds intimidating.
I got you. So let me throw this out there because this was a point that I wanted to touch on. And again, as I say, every episode we do this, just in case it's somebody's first time listening.
Oh, yeah.
Tom and I don't represent AA as a whole or any 12-step fellowship by that means. This is simply our experience. This is simply my interpretation based off my experience. If something's my opinion, I'll I'll let you know it's my opinion, so to speak. So take it with a grain of salt, if you will. But I think we're pretty well versed on this stuff and got a lot of experience with it. So I'll leave you with that. But made a search and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. A lot of people do say that sounds intimidating, but I do want to share something with you based off of my experience, and this isn't necessarily make jabs at people, it's just the truth from what I've seen and working with as many sponsees as I've worked with over the years. I've sat down, I could probably tell you, I don't think it would be far-fetched to say that I've probably guided somewhere around 100, close to 100 people through 4 steps at this point, not including teaching people about it in the treatment, because I do a group on it, but actually taking sponsees one-on-one through it on my own time as part of my own altruistic program in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I've got some experience with this. A lot of times people say that they're intimidated, they're too afraid to look at themselves, and they're scared to do it. I want to tell you the truth of what I've seen. Steps 1, 2, and 3 is basically reading, if you will. Like my sponsor read to me, broke down the big book line by line, explained 1, 2, and 3. If you haven't heard our podcast episodes on those prior to this one, I suggest going back and listening if you're not familiar with these steps. But with that being said, step 4 is the first time it's the action that needs to be taken. First time we're actually going to grab a notebook and a pen and have to literally do some work and write some stuff down. The reason I'm hitting this home, people tell me all the time, "Oh, I haven't started my 4-step because I'm too scared to do it." I finally figured out after all these years that's BS. Most people are just too lazy to do it. I'm just being straightforward. That is my experience. And I don't mind hitting people with the truth, because sometimes we need to be hit with that. If you look at made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, the word moral means truth. The definition of insanity, according to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, is you can't tell the true from the false, you have an appalling lack of perspective, etc. Basically, the inability to see the truth. So we have to find the truth about ourselves. That's what the word moral means, truth. So, and this isn't a list of necessarily all the bad things that we've done, because we're doing something moral with it. It's not an immoral inventory. We're going to take this moral inventory, write this stuff down, and we're going to utilize it to change for the better. So we're using it in a moral manner.
Let me pause you there. And I think this is one of the things that you oftentimes hear Ben and I talk about is, and this goes back a lot of episodes, getting sober has very little to do about drugs and alcohol. And it has everything to do with the way that we live our lives. And we say this all the time. A lot of people can put the plug in the jug. They can stop using. And but nothing in their lives changed. They're still an asshole. You know, they're still just somebody that they haven't changed anything about them other than they don't drink and they don't do drugs. When working the steps and you finally get to this point of step 4, this is where, and this is why I think Ben called it the action step, which there's more action steps, but this is the beginning of it. This is where this change starts to take place. We start changing, when we decide to get sober. But the more effort that we put into this and the more that we're willing to be honest and, do what is outlined, the more that we're going to notice a change. And these are the things that we have to do that's going to help ensure us, build a solid foundation of sobriety. So, it's little to do about the drugs and alcohol, extremely little to do, everything to do with how we're going to live. So
I'm just thinking about it right now. It's going to be really hard for me not to talk about the 5th step, but I'll do my best to stick to the 4th. Yeah, I know how I'll do that now in my head. All right, I got it. So the book does say, though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. That's exactly what Tom was just saying, and I just read that straight out of the book. Remember, step 3, we made a decision. And basically, in its simplest form, I reiterate, go back and listen to the last episode on step 3, we made a decision to move on to the 4th step because we want this thing to hold some permanent effect. So what does the 4th step cover? Essentially, it breaks down, there's certain sections. And just to reiterate one more time what Tom said, I want to remind you from previous episodes, the big book tells us we need a personality change sufficient to overcome our alcoholism. Personality change. And that's what we're working on, our personality. So the big book addresses a couple things. It tells us that the number one offender is resentment. Resentment is not the only offender, but it is the number one offender according to their experience. What does the word resentment mean? Sentiment means feel, the Latin root. If you put resentment actually means to re-feel. So basically speaking, the analogy that was explained to me, and this I've kind of taken this from Joe and Charlie. They use a football game. I like to use MMA as my example. Anybody ever, Tom, have you ever seen an MMA fight where, for instance, Anderson the Spider Silva was fighting, what was that guy's name? Chael Sonnen, I believe.
Okay.
Yep. And you're watching it. You got pay-per-view at home, right? You got all your buddies over. Anderson the Spider Silva, he's fast, man. He throws a quick leg kick, and all of a sudden he's down on the ground holding his leg, right? And everyone's like, whoa, what happened? And everyone's up in arms, like Chael Sonnen's hands are up because he knows he won. Those guys are fast. It was a blur. You could hardly see what happened. It looked like it hurt when it happened. However, pay-per-view, what do they have?
Instant replay?
Exactly, Tom.
Okay.
Instant replay machine. So what does pay-per-view do? They play it from a different angle. They got slow motion. They zoom in. They got their special effects. The sound, they make it a little bit more audible. You hear the crack. When it's in slow motion, you see his leg hit his leg, and you see it like bend and flop over. If you're on YouTube, like you can see my hands like, and you know what I'm talking about? Where
Yeah, the leg literally snaps.
yeah, and flops like a dead fish. And when that happens, it looked bad at first. However, when they do that instant replay, now everyone else now the oohs and ahs get even louder at your house, right? Because it looks even worse. So that's what a resentment is. It hurt the first time. Somebody hurt you the first time. They hurt your feelings. They threatened you, whatever the case may be. We have, as addicts and alcoholics, we got this instant replay in our heads. We take it home. We replay it. Every time their part becomes more, ours becomes less. It's them, it's them, it's them. The situation, we build it in our heads beyond what it even was to begin with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's and on top of that, no, I don't want to say that yet. Go ahead. It does. Makes total sense.
Okay, so resentments it means to re-feel. Now, it talks about resentment, which I'll continue on with in a second. It also talks about fear, and we have a sex inventory as well that goes along with the 4-step.
So you have resentment, fear, and sex inventory. We're covering these 3 things in the 4-step.
Correct.
Okay.
So here's the thing. I'm going to, obviously this is a podcast. It's kind of hard to show. Like I was taught to follow the big book exactly as it says. We'll start off with resentments. Basically, it gives us a little format in the big book. There's a column that says I'm resentful at. In this case, Bill W. used the example of Mr. Brown. He's resentful at Mr. Brown. Second column's the cause. Why? He paid attention to my wife. He told my wife and my mistress. And Mr. Brown may get my job at the office. So Bill W.'s mad at Mr. Brown for those things. Then it goes on in the third column to state how it affected him. So it affected his sex relations because now if Mr. Brown disclosed to his wife that he has a mistress, his wife probably isn't sleeping with him, right? It hurts his self-esteem because Mr. Brown might get his job at the office, except it hurts his security because if Mr. Brown gets his job at the office, now he might not have the money to secure himself in his home, his finances, whatever the case may be. And it goes on. It touches on self-esteem, pocketbooks, ambitions, personal relationships. These things were hurt or threatened, and it goes on. Like I'll stop with the detail there. Important to get a sponsor.
And what page is this on?
This is all on page 65 of the big book.
So if you have a big book with you or you have one at home that's in your underwear drawer, that's where mine was for a long time. I never pulled it out. But if you have one at home, grab it, turn to page 65, and you can reference the columns that he's talking about.
Yep. So here's what happens in a 4-step, just to kind of throw it out there as a whole. People in general, not just addicts and alcoholics, honestly, what we get stuck in, and you know what? For our viewers too that have a loved one in active addiction, this will be good for you to hear too. What we get stuck in is who did it to me, what they did, and how it made me feel. Mm-hmm. Tom, you snubbed me, and this is how I feel about it. Here's the problem. Victims don't stay sober, is what my sponsor told me. If I get stuck in the who did it, what they did, and how it made me feel, and I'm never able to move beyond that, a guy like me is most certainly going to drink again or drug again because I need to feel some sort of relief from this anger, anxiety, lack of self-esteem, whatever the case may be. I fix that with alcohol and drugs. So how do we get past the who did it, what they did, and how it made me feel? And that is the psychology that I love behind the 4-step. So you write out these columns just like that. And basically speaking, the next steps it has us. You've heard the saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes?
Yeah, of course.
Let me throw my opinion out there on something too. I was taught to follow the big book exactly as it's laid out. For people that have done a 4-step before, what they always jump to is what was your part in it? Where were your faults? There's actually a couple paragraphs on page 66 and 67 that have instructions before we even look at our own part. And that's where I'm going with the put yourself in someone else's shoes. It goes on to say, well, I won't paraphrase this, I'll just skip it. But it basically says, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. So that person that I'm angry at, and this is what I love, Tom, if I'm angry at you and I'm ready to punch you in the face right now, whether it's from the past, the present, or maybe a future situation, and the first thing I do is change my mindset from, I want to punch Tom in the face, to, why would I show Tom tolerance, pity, and patience? So, Tom, I'm going to tolerate Tom, just to give you all an example. I'm going to tolerate Tom because I work with him. I have no choice. I'm going to see him every day. Wish somebody would fire the guy, but that's out of my control, right? So I have to tolerate him. Why would I show him pity? God, if I was as miserable as Tom, I feel pretty bad for the guy. He's miserable every day, right? And why would I show Tom patience? Well, Tom is, he's surrounded by some good guys. He went to House of Principals. He's at Rock. He's surrounded by some good therapists, some even better clients. Maybe they'll rub off on him. And if I give him patience or time, Tom might change. I got the opportunity to change. Why wouldn't I give Tom the opportunity to change? The whole thing is with that tolerance, pity, and patience thing, is turning it into not, I want to punch Tom in the face, to, how can I be helpful to either Tom or the situation? Because it does go on to tell us a little bit later, like, we can't be helpful to all people, but we can be helpful to the situation. There are situations in people's past, such as, I'll just throw sexual trauma out there, for instance. If you were 8 years old and you were sexually molested as a kid, like, did you play a part in that? Are you responsible for that? Not necessarily, no. However, I will point out what we are responsible for. We are responsible for not allowing that to hold power over us and let that person hold us hostage for the rest of our lives, like I did. I was in a situation such as that. The part that I played was allowing myself to stay a hostage to that situation for the next 19, 20 years. That fueled my drug addiction even worse. So again, not my fault, not your fault if you're in a situation like that, but we can look at the part that, hey, how am I going to free myself of this? We do need to be responsible for that. Like I was saying, it says we can't be helpful to all people. Sometimes the best thing that we can do is inspire somebody. So how can my behavior maybe inspire somebody? Maybe there's an indirect way to be helpful. So, I don't want to get too crazy on this. I go into real detail with our clients here at Rock and my sponsees even more so, because that's not like a group setting where I'm just trying to teach them the principles behind it. But there's so much psychology to this. It says things like we avoid retaliation or argument, things like that. Like, the world will wrong you. There are jerks out there. The old saying, kill them with kindness.
You get more with honey than you do vinegar?
Yes, Tom. That was one of my favorite lines, and he stole it from me, so I don't use it anymore. You know what? You're on my resentment list for that now. Yeah. But I'll tolerate it, Tom.
So, with the 4-step in general, I think a lot of times people that are on their first go around with the 12 steps, they get to this point and they've oftentimes heard other people's opinions about the 4-step, and they've heard other people's experiences of the 4-step. If you have a sponsee that comes to you, let's just say I'm your sponsee, and I've never done this before. Ben, when I was in treatment, I heard all about this 4-step. I have no idea what it is. I have no exposure to the 12 steps. What is the 4-step? And I know we have to go through steps 1, 2, and 3 to get there, but give me some sort of like elevator version of what it is. And that's the end of the role play side of it. What you're saying, you're explaining it very well. But I want you to also explain what it is on an extremely, extremely, extremely basic level, that for a listener out there that doesn't have a clue.
In 2 words, cleaning house. So if I had to boil it down to its simplest part is when it comes to the resentments in particular, taking these situations that I've been in my past and using them as evidence on how I should have acted differently in those situations so that I don't repeat those same mistakes, reactions, if you will.
Okay, but let me go to the 8-year-old
Mm-hmm.
that was sexually molested as a child. There was no way that person could have acted differently in the moment. So what are you, but you're saying that maybe when, like, hindsight's 2020, when you get older, you have a different, you are supposed to act in a different way. Like you said, don't let it hold power over you.
I'm glad you asked this. This is some advanced 4-step stuff. You just asked an advanced 4-step question.
Okay.
So I'll preface that. Since you brought up that example specifically, I'll say this. We can act differently. I took that, when that happened to me, I took that and I used it as ammunition against the world. I played the victim card and I used it to fuel my drug addiction. And for lack of a better way to say it, I'm sorry I'm saying it like this, I used it as an excuse. Well, yeah, Mom, of course I'm smoking crack tonight. I was thinking about when I was raped. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
How acting differently, and this is a hard pill to swallow for some people, but it was a liability in my active addiction because I didn't work on it. When I worked on it, it became an asset. And this ties into the 12-step, helping others. When I started to use my past experience and my experience working a 4-step, and now I can use it to help other people, because I'm not the only one in the world that's happened to, Tom. I've come across a lot of guys and ladies who have been in similar situations, and thankfully today, it's part of my story, because guess what? When I share that with them, I have their trust instantly. They see that I'm living my life differently by a demonstration of my principles, as the big book talks about. They're more impressed with the demonstration of our principles, wondering how we got there. So to act differently, in that case, I'm going to stop using it as a liability and now use it as an asset.
That makes sense.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I can't tell you, it's been quite the experience at this point. Don't get me wrong, I still get sick to my stomach and this visceral response when I initially start talking about it, but when I see that it helps somebody else, it no longer hurts me in that moment. I'm like, wow, I'm actually being helpful with this.
There's a page, and you can tell me where this is. I know it's in the promises. It says, "We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it."
Exactly. That's in how it works.
And that's on page
what is
64?
it? 53?
53. No, you're on page. Anyways, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I think on a very basic level, and Ben will use your experience, the sexual trauma that you had to go through is something that, because you've gone through these steps and because you've done a proper 4-step and so on, you're able to take that situation and you don't regret that it happened and you don't wish to shut the door on it, because if you hadn't had that experience, you wouldn't be able to be where you're at today.
Yeah, I did not give you the right page number, but anyway.
Did you hear anything I just said?
Yeah, I was listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But so just to kind of move on with it though too, after doing that part and asking ourselves how we can be helpful with the resentments, we're supposed to look at our part. And basically, in a nutshell, you answer, where were you selfish? Where were you dishonest? Where were you self-seeking? And where were you frightened? Now, fear can be broken down in any situation. What do I have that I'm afraid to lose, or what am I not going to get that I want? You can literally look at any confrontation that you've been in your life, and you are either afraid of losing something or not getting something. That's the simplest way to break down fear. So, for instance, I run into a lot of situations where I do fourth and fifth steps with sponsees, and they're angry at their father who's an alcoholic. Yet you turn around and they're alcoholic themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're being selfish. They're being dishonest with themselves. A lot of times they're self-seeking because they're trying to figure out ways to hide their drinking, get money to drink or drug or whatever the case is. It is important to look at your part in things, and that's the truth. That's the moral part. So you're taking these resentments. Again, it tells us we hold the keys to the future here. The only reason you're looking at your past is so that you can improve your future. Because let's call it what it is. You're going to be in confrontation at some point in your life. The difference is we handle it differently today. And that's what the big book teaches us, the principles. Follow?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking what you just said there, I mean, it really makes a lot of sense, especially to somebody that doesn't even know anything about the 12 steps or anything about Alcoholics Anonymous or so on and so forth. It's how we handle situations. And that is one of the things that I think if we were to take a look at all the people that have come through Rock that we have known in the recovery community, a lot of times if they do relapse, if you do kind of boil it down and look at it, they were in some sort of situation in which they handled it completely wrong. And again, it goes back to how much effort are you willing to put into this process? Because if you do this the way that it's laid out in the book and you're willing to put in 110%, then the change is going to happen, and it can't not happen. It's going to happen. And, this is how we build that solid foundation of sobriety. And you're at much, much, much less risk of relapse.
So there's a saying, I think I've said it before on here, but there's a saying, the relapse ends with the drink. It doesn't start with the drink. How often, Tom, do we see our clients, for instance, and this is the cliche way to say it, is to go to a client and be like, hey, man, you're in relapse mode. We literally see the behavior changing before they get high or drunk. And that's when we intervene. And there's a bunch of stories in the big book about that. There's a guy named Jim. They call him Milk and Whiskey. Great story in the big book. It's in chapter 2. It's about a guy who had all kinds of resentment. He did some goofy things that led up to his drink. And at the end, he was like, suddenly he found himself drinking, just to paraphrase it. And when you read his story, you're just like, dude, this was not suddenly. Like, everybody else saw this coming. And that's the whole thing is like, again, we need that personality change. Jim found himself in a spot where he was living so uncomfortably that the only thing that was going to make him comfortable was a drink. And it caught him out of nowhere, but everybody else could see it coming plain as day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and then you look at your part, and the question of the matter, if I had to sum it up on the resentments, do you want to be a victim or do you want to be a helper?
Yeah.
And I think taking our past and using it for future purpose, a solid, good, positive purpose is where it's at. I also want to throw this out there because opinions run to extremes on this one. I'm a quality over quantity guy when it comes to writing a 4-step. Always listen to your sponsor. Do what your sponsor tells you. I'll say that. However, in my experience, what I've found over doing so many 4th and 5th steps with myself and with sponsees, I found quality over quantity. I found that generally speaking, when somebody has about 10 names down, 10 to 30 names, it's usually a really solid 4-step. Sometimes you'll hear, guys, my sponsor told me to write down every single name of every person that ever came to my mind, and people would tell me they had like 400 names on their 4-step. I'm like I guess I get it. I do, because I guess you can find a resentment with anybody at some point. But what I get my sponsees to focus on first are the ones that really jump to their mind. Because the whole thing is I'll call it what it is. After about 5 to 8 of them, what we really quickly realize is we repeat the same patterns over and over and over again. So, I found the best fourth and fifth steps I've ever done with sponsees have had between 10 and 30 names, probably.
I remember seeing somebody, he did a 4-step, and it was literally in a notebook that was like one of those inch thick notebooks, and it was just names. And I was like, what in the world? And it just didn't make sense to me. And my 4-step, when I did it, this is many years ago, it was kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because if I rattled off the names of everybody that came into my mind, I can't associate a resentment with, like, there's no way.
Yeah.
My grandmother, like, I don't have a resentment towards Granny.
Or like Johnny in the lunch line in kindergarten that pushed me to get the last corn dog.
Yeah, I don't
like,
know.
I mean, I get it. And again, like.
But this is where, and not to cut you off, but this is where I draw an issue with some AA. Some AA is, you get these people that are super legalistic in a way, and like, I want you to write down every single name of every person that's ever crossed your path in your life. And I'm just like, I don't know. It just seems too, we're supposed to wear this like a loose garment, right? And that's a saying in the rooms and stuff. Our recovery, we're supposed to wear it like a loose garment. It's not all consuming. It's not something. So, and I think this process, it does need to be fearless. It does need to be thorough. But it doesn't need to be all consuming and, totally just drain us of every, I don't know. I remember when I finished my 4-step and everybody said, I heard some people say to me, oh, you should have this overwhelming feeling of like freedom. I didn't have that. And I don't know, and I don't think it was because of lack of effort. I feel like I did a very fearless and thorough 4-step, but I didn't have this rush good feeling come over me. It was just like, okay, that's cool. I did it. And now let's move on. So, anyways, what else you got on the 4-step?
The other thing that I wanted to say about it was, we touched on the quality over quantity. The amount of time that it takes to write it, too. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, my sponsor gave me 3 months to write it. I literally tell my guys, like, if I meet with them on a Friday night to read, I'm like, I would like this done by the following Friday. Once in a while, I'll give them like 2 weeks. But the fact of the matter is, once you sit down and do it, it really doesn't take that long. It really doesn't.
Well, and you give somebody 3 months to do it, they're going to take 3 months to do it. And they could come back to you in 3 months and have 10 names on their list.
Just FYI, we really messed up earlier. It's not in how it works. It's we do not regret. Do not regret the past. No, I wish to shut the door on it. Brain fart, guys. That's a 9-step promises.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Sorry, you should have corrected me.
Well, I wasn't that confident in my.
I was like, sorry, I couldn't let that one go. It was like bouncing around the back of my head.
So listen, for the sake of time, that is a basic rundown of the 4-step. Go ahead. What do you want to say?
Well, real quick, I want to just touch on the fears and the sex inventory.
All right.
But they're way shorter than the resentment part.
Yeah.
There's the resentments in a nutshell. Don't get stuck in who did it, what they did, and how it made me feel. Figure out how you can be helpful, and then look at your part where you should have done something different. You should have not been selfish, self-centered, fearful, etc. The next part it talks about, there's a section on fears. It says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. To paraphrase, we asked ourselves why we had them. Reality of the situation is with fears, again, what are you going to lose? What are you not going to get? But I go into way more detail. It's kind of hard to go into detail, so I'm just going to make this brief for the sake of the podcast format. But it's about trying to control everything. And fear is a lot about control. I go into way more detail with my sponsees, but you do want to review your life fears. A lot of people say like fear of success. It's not like fear of heights and fear of snakes. It's not that kind of stuff. Fear of not being accepted would be one, for instance. Fear of people not liking me. Fear of not being successful. Things along those lines.
Well, based off of what you said earlier, which makes total sense to me, and I never heard it this way, fear is, if I look at any situation, fear is a fear of losing something that I currently have, or fear that I'm not going to get something. And that makes total sense, So I think, fear of snakes. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to lose my life if I get bitten by one.
Yeah.
They just scare the shit out of me.
Yeah.
I think this is more of a...
It's more the psychology behind our behavior, so to speak. Like, I was taught to go back to my resentments, because it does say, even there was no resentment in connection with them, the book does say that on the line. Like, and that's true. However, we can find fears in our resentment inventory. Like, if I'm in a situation where Tom and I got in an argument, and what was my fear in that situation? Well, if I lost the argument, that would hurt my pride, and then people would think less of me around the office. Like, there is fear behind that, my good standing, etc. But again, I don't want to get crazy on the fear thing. It's something I go into more detail with my sponsees. It's just hard to do in this format without reading the book line by line and breaking it down. The last one is that we go over is the sex inventory. And that is not about writing down every single person you ever had sex with. Basically, it's probably easiest if I just read it. And we always say this: we're not the arbiter of anybody's sex conduct. It does say that we can give suggestions on it, because some opinions run to extremes is literally what it says in the big book when it comes to sex. Some people think you should be able to have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want, however you want to do it. And other people are like, only after marriage, one person so we stay out of the controversy. But basically, I think it's easiest to read it, to sum it up. We reviewed our conduct over the years past in reference to sex. Where we've been self-dishonest, inconsiderate. Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. And then it goes on to say, we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? So basically, you're just... all the situations, maybe one-night stands where drug stuff are involved, like, maybe you tried to have sex with somebody that you knew had feelings for you, you didn't have feelings for them, that's selfish, and etc. And again, what this is about is behaving better, and what you end up doing on the following page is we set what we call our sex ideals. And it's just basically you make a list, an explanation of how your behavior should be in the future when it comes to sex. And a lot of times it ties into your future relationship. A lot of people have the tendency to think about, what would I want my future wife to be like? And they name all their qualities, and not just their qualities, but also your qualities as an individual. Like, where I'm not going to get into a relationship until after I've moved out of the halfway house and maybe finish my degree and I have a solid job and I can actually provide for a woman. Stuff along those lines. Setting some ideals for your future sex relationships, intimate relationships, whatever the case may be. And it goes on to say, sometimes we stray from that, but it is really good to sit down and figure that out. It keeps us out of rehab romances, hopefully.
Well, and that's what I was, and I think this is a good place to end. If we I'm not sure, 4 or 5 episodes ago, I did a podcast on, sex and money, relationships and money, sex and checks, as you would often hear them say. And this is why it's important, because when we do get sober, having a new perspective on, sexual relations, intimate relationships, those sorts of things, we need to have a different perspective on it. Because really, again, like I said in the very beginning, this whole sobriety thing is less to do about drugs and alcohol, and it's more to do with the way that we live our lives and, the changes that we want to make moving forward. And, that's the most important part, is becoming a better human being and, not using drugs and not drinking. Mm-hmm. So Cool, Ben. Good job.
Yeah, no, I was excited to do the 4-step, and as we were doing it, I started to realize I'm actually more excited to do the 5th step.
Oh, the 5th step. All
That's
right.
where you tell somebody all your 4 steps.
Well, don't tell. Don't.
I'm not.
You
I'm
know.
just,
yeah.
the reason I'm excited about it, let's just like do like a preview for the next episode.
Okay.
That's because where my experience with everything that I wrote down, sharing it with somebody else, like that's where I had the experience that I needed.
Good. All right. Well, we will make sure to do that episode here relatively soon.
Sweet.
All right. That is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. If in fact you did get value out of this, please take a minute, share it with somebody. And in the end, if you want to reach out to either myself or Ben, you could reach out to us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.